What's up everyone, it's King Moose here with JCross X to welcome you all back for episode 2 of Unit Overview. In this series we will be analyzing all the playable units in Fire Emblem 3 houses regarding their recruitment requirements, personal abilities, stats, spell lists, and everything in between to determine their strengths and limitations as a unit in your army. We will also be providing potential class recommendations for all these units, as well as ranking them on a tier list at the end of our analysis. These videos are generally gameplay focused, so we do our best to avoid story spoilers, but we always advise you to watch with discretion anyways, especially for a character like Edelgard. And if you haven't played 3 houses yet, we highly recommend that you do.
This episode will be focused on Edelgard von Hresvelg, the leader of the Black Eagle's house. She appears in the first prologue battle, but is only available for the rest of the game if you select to teach the Black Eagle's house after the events of that fight. Just like Byleth, she is available in almost every battle, and usually you're forced to deploy her. There are a few exceptions, such as Chapter 6 mission, where she is not present and won't be in battle with you. She's not recruitable out of house either, as is the case with all house leaders. If you pick the Black Eagles and do not meet certain requirements to trigger the Crimson Flower route, you will lose access to her as a unit late into White Clouds at Chapter 11, and she will no longer be available for the rest of the Silver Snow route. If you're curious about the requirements, I'll mention them in the least spoilery way I can, but skip ahead if you wish. Firstly, you need to have at least C+ support with her, which is pretty easy enough by this point. Then, you must talk to Edelgard during the exploration point before the end of Chapter 11, where she will ask you to come with her to Embar to witness her being coordinated as the new Emperor of Adrestia. Afterwards, you must choose to defend Edelgard at the end of the Chapter 11 mission. Edelgard's crest is the Crest of Saros, specifically the minor variant of it. This crest activates when specifically attacking with combat arts, and when doing so, there is a 40% chance to raise might by 5. Additionally, Edelgard is one of the only units in the game to possess 2 crests. Just like Byleth in the last episode, Edelgard possesses the major Crest of Flames, which has a 20% chance to activate whenever dealing damage with weapons, offensive magic, or combat arts. When it activates, it always restores HP equal to 30% of damage dealt, assuming you're missing HP. Each time it activates, it also has a 25% chance to increase might by 5 and prevent the enemy from counterattacking. Like all other crests, it also grants the ability for Edelgard to use relic weapons without taking damage from them.
Edelgard's personal ability is Imperial Lineage, which functions identically to Dimitri's Royal Lineage and Claw's Lesser Lineage, granting her 20% more XP from combat. This is a strictly worse version of Byleth's personal ability, Professor's Guidance, since it only applies to herself and not adjacent allies, but it's still an extremely good ability. It can also stack with Professor's Guidance and the Experience Grab to boost XP gain even further. The benefits of this ability are obvious. Leveling up faster means her stats grow faster, especially on a unit with excellent growth like Edelgard, and also means she can reach the level requirements for each stage of classes faster. As we mentioned with Byleth's personal, this is even more helpful in maddening difficulty where the XP gain is quite slow compared to lower difficulties. Starting in Chapter 13, this ability gets upgraded to Imperial Lineage Plus. Frankly, it isn't very much of an upgrade at all. It retains a 20% XP boost, which is still very good, but the new effect is that Edelgard now gains +4 res for 1 turn whenever she uses the Wait command. This is basically a res version of the Du's personal ability that isn't unlocked until much later in the game, which makes it way less useful. Edelgard does have decent enough res and potentially get some value out of this when baiting enemy mages. However, +4 res is just not nearly enough to justify giving up your player phase on a unit like Edelgard who is insanely good combat.
Looking at Edelgard's skill levels, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but she does have a few things going for her. First, we can take a look at the Banes, one of which is Faith, which hardly matters since even if you did run a magical Edelgard, you'd most likely chain Reason instead. Speaking of which, Edelgard does have a budding talent in Reason, which will become a boon after 12 teaching sessions with Byleth. As for her other Bane, it is unfortunately in Bows, which is not great. Bows are one of the best weapon types in 3 houses and a great secondary weapon to have on hand, especially due to the existence of Curve Shot. It starts at E rank, of course, so you're going to have to push it a bit if you want to pick up Curve Shot and see Bows for the ever so important Archer certification. As for boons, she has 1 in Axes and starts with a D rank in them, meaning she comes equipped with Axe Prowess level 1 and the Axe Combat Art Smash by default. This makes Edelgard weapon of choice at the start of her playthrough obvious, especially since Smash is a great combat art that synergizes with her crest. Given that Edelgard has her own personal class that focuses on axes as well as a very strong axe relic and a mirror, this is often the weapon type most people have her stick with throughout the entire game. Edelgard also has a boon in swords and a starting rank of E+, meaning she has sword prowess level 1 by default. This is a shared boon of all house leaders, so if you do want to use swords on any of them, you are certainly able to do so if you desire. Speaking of boons that all the house leaders have, the one in Authority is very important as per usual. She starts at D, which is not bad at all, and as we said with the last episode for Byleth, the faster you have access to better battalions, the better, as they are very impactful in this game. Lastly, we have the debatably useful boon in Heavy Armor. While some do choose to have Edelgard go down the armored path, we personally believe there are better options for that role, and she has other classes that allow her to shine more, which we will talk about soon.
Edelgard has some really good base stats that get her off to a nice head start at the beginning of the game. Her base HP of 29 is tied for the second highest, only beat out slightly by the dedicated prod tanks that have 30. Combined with a solid base 6 offense and 4 res, which is a bit above average for a physical unit, her overall starting bulk is pretty good. Her base speed of 8 is also very good, only beaten out by some of the fastest units in the game. She has a base magic of 6, which is actually fairly good for a physical unit, but her standout stat is definitely strength, which at 13 is tied with only Byleth for the highest in the game. Charm is also a standout, being the absolute highest in the game at 10. This is a great spread, but if I can point to any issue with her bases, it would be the Dex and Luck, which are both only 5. This can make both her hit and crit rates on the lower end in the early game, especially since axes are already the least accurate weapon type. However, the combat art Smash does help with patching up both these issues. Moving on to growth rates, Edelgard's bulk once again remains very solid and balanced with 40% HP growth and 35% to both defense and res. Her magic growth is shockingly good at 45%, which is equally good or even better than some dedicated mages. Her dex and speed are fairly average at 45% and 40% respectively, while her luck is her worst growth at only 30%, but that's not even that bad honestly. Once again, her strength and charm are the standouts. Her charm growth is 60%, which is once again the highest in the game, and her strength growth is 55%, which is tied with Felix for the second highest in the game, and only beaten slightly by Dimitri. While there are a few somewhat weak areas in her stat distribution, Edelgard is overall a statistically incredible unit. She has solid bulk and speed paired with some of the best strength in the game to bolster her damage output, and she has the best charm in the game, which makes her an extremely reliable gambit user.
Edelgard has a number of unique combat arts aside from the standard ones, but only for swords and axes. To start with the sword arts, Edelgard gets Haste Slice at C+ swords. For 5 durability, this combat art grants plus 2 might and plus 30 void with no special effect. Edelgard also gets Hexblade at the A rank, which costs 3 durability and grants plus 7 might and plus 10 hit. However, this is a magical combat art, meaning it scales off of Edelgard's magic against enemies' res rather than using strength or defense. Honestly, these are not the combat arts you'd really want to use on Edelgard. While you can build her magically and she actually has a solid growth in magic, this will generally be weaker than some of the strength-focused setups. As for Haste Slice, 5 durability for only 2 extra damage while providing 30 void is really situational, especially when it's not being used by a unit that actually has a really high speed tier to back it up. This is basically the duelist blow of combat arts, and we think there are definitely better combat arts Edelgard can use specifically. As for her axe combat arts, she gets Monster Breaker at C+, which in exchange for 5 durability, you get a whopping plus 9 boost to your might, but no other boost aside from the effective damage it does against monsters, meaning it multiplies the base might by 3. Although the damage boost is certainly high, it doesn't boost crit, hit, avoid, or any other stat, so it is debatably useful over something like Smash, which is much more reliable and costs less durability. As for her last combat art, she gets Lightning Axe at A axes. Lightning Axe is a good magical combat art, and is one of the only ways for Edelgard to take advantage of magic damage on her own personal class for some reason, but still not her definitive combat art as she is not a hyper-focused magic unit. What makes Edelgard stand out the most in this area though is most certainly Raging Storm. I'll just come out immediately and say that this combat art is completely busted and is a big part of the reason why she's a premier player phase unit in this game. For 3 durability, Raging Storm boosts your might by a whopping 14, raises hit by 10, and has the extremely broken effect of letting the user have another turn if the attack lands. You can do this as few or as many times as you want, assuming you have the durability to do so. It's also effective against dragon foes too, which is an added bonus. Not only is the combat art coming off of Aymr, which is a strong relic with 24 might, 60 hit, and 20 crit, Edelgard herself has a really good strength stat, meaning that she can most likely one around multiple units or destroy a difficult enemy before using her last turn to retreat. Obviously, this comes with the cost of using her relic, which are hard to repair, but I will personally go out of my way in auxiliary battles to break the shields of giant crawlers for more Gartheme if I need to repair Aymr because of just how broken this thing is. Overall, Edelgard's dependent combat arts are somewhat decent, aside from her own personal relic, which is one of the most broken combat arts in the game.
Edelgard is an exceptionally strong unit, but that strength doesn't really come from her dependent abilities. Honestly, her set is not the greatest. Like Byleth in the last episode, she gets Battalion Advantage at the C rank and Model Leader at the C+ rank. Model Leader doubles the XP that battalions earn, so it's a convenient tool that she can equip to quickly get her battalions to max level, but it's unlikely to stick around for more than a few battles. As for Battalion Advantage, it grants the Advantage effect, which allows her to attack before the enemy when that enemy initiates combat with her, whenever her battalion endurance is at 1/3 or below of its max endurance. You can use this if you want, but I've never found this ability to be that useful on its own without Battalion Wrath alongside it, and Edelgard is usually better off focusing on her player phase combat anyways. At A Authority, she gets Battalion Renewal, which is the same 1/3 battalion endurance threshold required for it to activate, but rather than granting the Advantage effect, it restores 30% of her max HP at the start of each turn. This is honestly really mediocre. On paper, it's a decent survivability tool of pairing it alongside other abilities that rely on low battalion endurance, but healing is so abundant in this game that there's not much of a reason to use a slot on this. If anything, you might be robbing your other units of getting the free healing XP. Her final authority ability is unlocked at the S rank, where she gets Rally Charm. By using her turn on the Rally command, she can grant one adjacent ally a plus 8 boost to Charm for 1 turn. This will be a very useful ability in the early game to make hitting gambits more reliable, but for an ability unlocked at S rank, it's underwhelming at best and not really worth a slot by the time it's unlocked. Edelgard has way better things to be doing in the player phase than rallying other units. We also have to bring up the ability she gets from unlocking her budding talent of Reason, Black Magic Crit plus 10. Honestly, this isn't a great ability on her at all since she only gets 2 black magic spells. Her dark magic spells are stronger and she can get dark magic range +1 and dark tome fair from her reason rank to supplement them, but that doesn't apply to black magic. So honestly, even for a magic Edelgard build, this isn't very useful. There is one more ability to discuss, and it comes from her exclusive Armored Lord class, which she unlocks for free at the start of Chapter 13. Mastering Armored Lord grants the equipable ability Pomp and Circumstance, which grants +4 to both Luck and Charm when it's equipped. Extra stats are never a bad thing, so this can make a decent filler ability, but I don't really think it's all that good. Luck and Charm can be useful stats, but personally I'd rather take the guaranteed value from Strength +2 most of the time if I'm going to run a stat boosting ability.
Despite being a very strong physical unit, Edelgard has a pretty solid spell list, but it's far from the best. The reason list is actually pretty unique, as she has a mix of both black and dark magic, one of the only units in the game to possess both. It starts off nicely with Fire at the D rank, which is a good low weight spell that has high accuracy. She doesn't get another reason spell until C though, where she unlocks Volganon, which is a decent damage upgrade going from 3 might on Fire to 8 might with this spell. At B region, she starts unlocking her dark magic spells with Luna, a spell that looks bad on paper with only 1 might. However, it has the really nice effect that completely ignores the enemy's resistance stat, which actually makes it scale pretty decently into the late game. Lastly, at A reason, Edelgard gets another dark magic spell in the form of Hades. It's quite a heavy dark magic spell at 16 weight and doesn't have amazing accuracy at 65 hit, but it is strong at 18 might alongside 10 crit, which is pretty solid. Overall, her spell list is actually relatively decent on the reason side of things, and alongside her budding talent and reason, it's definitely one of the reasons some people decide to take her down the magical path. As for her face spell list, she gets Heal and Nosferatu at D and D+ respectively, just like every other unit. As for her unique spells, she gets Recover at C, which is more potent than Heal with less uses, which can be pretty solid on a unit like Edelgard who doesn't have the highest magic growth compared to dedicated casters. One skill rank later, at B she gets her last face spell, Seraphim. It's a mid-weight offensive white magic spell with a decent amount of uses, 8 might, 5 crit, a solid hit of 75, while also having the added bonus of being effective against monsters. Overall, Edelgard's spell list is pretty solid offensively. While lacking really any form of utility aside from decent healing, she can be a threat magically given her decent growth and some of her strong spells she has in store if you manage to push her that far.
Edelgard's biggest strength is definitely her player phase combat, which is almost certainly the absolute best in the game. Her stats are partially responsible for this, since her strength stats is among the best in the game, and her speed and other stats are all very solid as well. Having such great stats gives her an already amazing early and mid game, but what really makes her broken in the later parts of the game is her relic weapon, Aymr, which we briefly mentioned before. Aymr is an insanely powerful axe, packing a whopping 24 might, which is the highest of any weapon in the game, bar none. It also grants a +20 boost to crit, which is nearly as high as a killer axe, all while having 11 weight, which is average for an axe. The only real downside in its stats is its hit rate of 60%, which is a bit below average even for an axe, but there are multiple ways to patch it up, so it's not a deal breaker. While other units can technically use Aymr, Edelgard is the only one who can use his combat art Raging Storm, which as Jeff described is the most busted combat art in the game. Edelgard can literally solo entire maps with Raging Storm, and while Aymr does have limited uses, it's not even that hard to repair if you take full advantage of auxiliary battles to farm Agarthian from giant crawlers. Even if you disregard Raging Storm, Edelgard still has some of the best stats in the game, a great personal ability that helps her stay ahead of the game in terms of levels, 2 useful crests, and might supports with both Byleth and Hubert to bolster her combat even further. The combination of having a boon and axes and also being female, unlike the other house leaders, means she has an easy promotion path through some of the strongest and most useful classes in the game. While we've been mainly focusing on her most optimal setup, Edelgard is so overwhelmingly strong that even niche off-meta options like magic builds or enemy phase builds can still be really good.
Edelgard is definitely one of the best units in the game, but she does have a few minor flaws. Just like Byleth, Edelgard falling in battle is a lost condition. Although we said last time that most people just consider this a gameplay mechanic, it's still an important thing to bring up that if she is defeated in battle, you are forced to use the Divine Pulse or restart the battle. This does only apply to Classic mode, however, so if you're playing on Casual mode, this weakness is negligible and you can just play aggressively as you want with her. Aside from that, I wanted to go back to a point I mentioned before regarding how she's technically available for the entire game if you pick the Black Eagles. However, her availability is pretty bad if you do end up not going down the Crimson Flower route, as she is not present in Chapter 6, Chapter 11 regardless, and then is unavailable for the entire second half of the game if you just don't defend her in Chapter 11. Obviously this is fine, and you could just do the Crimson Flower route if you know the requirements for it, which are pretty easy, but it's still a weakness regardless. Lastly, we only have really one other weakness, which is that damn Bowbane. It's not the worst thing in the world, as you generally can stop at C for the Archer certification, but you generally want to push for that as fast as you can, and picking up Curve Shot as soon as possible is just a really nice supplement to that. It just makes her early game slightly worse, but that's about it. Overall, we are definitely nitpicking here, as Edelgard only has a few mild stipulations that could make her slightly annoying to use, but when the reward is the most broken player phaser in the game, she's definitely worth it.
Looking at the beginner class options for Edelgard, the obvious choice is Fighter. She already starts with the requirements for it because of her axe rank, so it's completely free certification while also granting the most useful ability for her out of all the beginner class mastery abilities, Strength +2. This ability is good enough that you can justify keeping it around for a long time, potentially even to the end of the game. I wouldn't worry too much about the positional combat arts for her, since her combat is so good that you will rarely want to use her turn to help another unit. Moving on to the intermediate classes, Brigand is the easiest to reach, once again because of her starting axe rank and boon. Mastering it grants Death Blow, granting her a +6 buff to physical attack when initiated in combat, which is arguably the single most important ability for her to obtain since she's primarily a player phase specialist. You will also want to master Archer as soon as possible to pick up hit plus 20. It's an essential skill in magic difficulty, especially since Edelgard is an axe user who doesn't start with great dex or luck, so she appreciates this to patch up her accuracy. However, the certification can be really difficult due to her bane and bows, so you may need to go Brigand first while waiting to reach the requirements. While you're going for those two masteries, you should also be trying to certify her into Pegasus Knight as soon as possible, which requires a bit of investment since she's only neutral in both the requirements, but it's not too difficult. The main reason is for the combat performance. Putting a unit as strong as Edelgard in a 6-move flying class with Kanto this early in the game just makes battle so much easier. Mastering it is also very useful since it grants Darting Blow, which increases attack speed by 6 when initiating combat. Again, since she is already a player phase focused unit and has pretty solid speed to begin with, this makes a great pairing with Death Blow and could definitely be worth taking up one of her ability slots. Also, while it isn't super necessary or anything, you might want to consider certifying for Armor Knight as soon as possible after reaching level 10, since it can grant you a few defense points due to Armor Knight's high base defense. You don't even have to actually use the class in battle, just certifying for it is enough, and the certification is really easy for Edelgard to obtain due to her starting ranks in axes and heavy armor.
When talking about advanced and master stage classes for Edelgard as well as other units with unique classes, we always like to bring up those first. Armor Lord and Emperor are free, zero investment armored axe focused classes. Just like Enlightened One in the last episode, we have talked about these classes extensively before, and as such I won't go into too much detail here. But generally the class is pretty mediocre and caps the potential of a really strong unit much lower than she can actually reach. Aesthetically, the classes look pretty cool, but with 5 move and no strength boost, the only thing that class is going for statistically are the high boost to HP and defense. Although it does give you access to free Axe Fair and another solid ability and charm, there are just better classes with higher move that supplement her unique strengths more. When using a prod tank, I generally pick a unit that is slower and doesn't have anything extremely broken for the player or enemy phase, which in this case, Edelgard does. Infantry classes in general, especially armored ones, typically have the same movement weakness, and on a unit so dominant in the player phase as Edelgard, I'd rather just pick something else unless I haven't finished my certification requirements yet. Moving specifically to the advanced stage, there really isn't much of a debate here. Wyvern Rider is one of the best classes in the game, and pairing up with one of the best player phases in the game is obviously going to give you some pretty impressive results. 7 move on a flyer with the added bonus of Kanto due to being mounted just makes using her Broken Relic in combat completely trivial. It allows her to get around the map and potentially one around multiple enemy units with ease by supplementing her damage with a +3 to strength alongside boosting axe damage with Axe Fair. Using other strong abilities such as Death Blow and hit +20 in these builds make her an absolute menace that will be extremely difficult to stop. As for other options, I do want to bring up Fortress Knight as it's arguably better than Armored Lord. Although it can be annoying to certify for usually, and I already talked about how I don't really recommend armor classes for her, Edelgard does have a boon in heavy armor as well as axe, so she can use it and is generally better as a prot tank than Armored Lord, so if you want to use her for that purpose, you can. There aren't really too many other recommendations I've had for the advanced stage aside from those who enjoy the magical Edelgard shenanigans. If you want, Warlock has pretty decent bases and can help you patch up her magical stats, and then I'd probably recommend Valkyrie for the good move and the extra range for dark and black magic. For the Master Stage, there really isn't too much to talk about. If you want to upgrade to Wyvern Lord, you can if you meet the certification, but Wyvern Rider is already broken enough as is. The extra strength boost as well as the slightly improved boost across the board is appreciated though. Avoid +10 is mostly redundant as you'd probably just be killing most enemies before they can even have a chance to react. Lastly, back to the funny magical builds, since Dark Knight supplements both dark and black magic just like Valkyrie but this time with Tome Fairs instead, it is the most logical next step given how easy Valkyrie makes the Dark Knight certification.
When it comes to Edelgard, a lot of the discourse around her is very polarizing and controversial to say the least. However, we don't think this tier list placement will be controversial at all. We're putting her in the S+ tier, a tier reserved only for the units we consider to be game-breaking, and if anyone belongs in this tier, it's most certainly Edelgard. In a game as player phase focused as 3 houses, Edelgard's combat just puts her in a different league from almost every other unit, even if you don't fully optimize her. That being said, if you want to use her to her fullest extent, the build we would recommend is her player phase Wyvern Lord build. Deathblow and Axe Prowess 5 are pretty much locks for the first 2 ability slots. Starting Blow can be very useful depending on how much speed your Edelgard ends up with. It's not super impactful for Raging Storm specifically, but it's very helpful for other areas of combat. Hit +20 is usually worth keeping around, especially because of Aymr's low hit rate, unless your accuracy is already reliable enough without it. As for the final slot, I would personally give it to Axe Crit +10 due to its synergy with Aymr's high crit rate, as well as the combat art Smash, though the S Axe rank requirement can be demanding to reach since Crimson Flower is the shortest route. If either Hit +20 or Axe Crit +10 isn't very appealing to you, Strength +2 is a perfectly good choice for the last slot. It pairs excellently with Darting Blow and Death Blow and speedy doubling focus builds. That's about all we have to say about Edelgard. If you enjoyed the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. If you're following our Persona overview series, the next episode will be released on Saturday on Jeff's channel. As for this series, stay tuned for the next episode of Unit Overview, which is about the next member of the Black Eagle House, Hubert von Vestra, on my channel next Tuesday. Thanks for watching.
Well, how was that?